Quick question before we get going. So this panel is called The Business of Free-to-Play Design, which sounds a little dry, but we're going to try to give you hopefully some good inside knowledge from a really diverse, I was going to say diverse, but we're a bunch of white dudes. So I think we're diverse industry-wise in terms of the games we work on. So hopefully there'll be a lot of different perspectives here. But give you some insight into stuff that people talk about less, I think, which is kind of, how do we actually design our games for monetization and try to get into some of the nitty-gritty there. And not just monetization, but kind of retention too, because we all kind of work on these service games, and it's all about, having a long-lasting service with players, customers that stick around a long time. The question I wanted to ask is, how many people have no experience with free-to-play? Okay, that's good. Well, not good, but just get a sense of the audience. What about like some limited experience with free-to-play? About half. And how about people who kind of feel like they know free-to-play pretty well? Okay, so kind of half and half, one side and the other side. I think also because it's a small audience, I was actually going to say it's okay if you want to ask questions right in the middle of the panel, because I think one thing that can happen is that we spend a lot of time talking, we don't leave time for questions, or that we kind of go in a different direction. So if people use jargon or they talk about something that sounds super interesting, just ask a question and I'll repeat it in the mic. You don't even have to, come up here. Just raise your hand and we'll get it. I'm going to jump right in. So we're going to kind of start more general and have people say who they are, what they do, who their user base is, and kind of what type of general free-to-play model they have in their games. And then we're going to kind of go into more specifics about some examples of using business goals and sort of KPI, key performance indicator type metrics to drive specific designs and give examples there. So let's start with Rob. You want to intro yourself? Who you are and what you do?
I'm Rob Martyn. I've been in the internet space since before there was an internet, before you guys were all born. I work at GSN Game Show Network currently. Run a solitaire Tri-Peaks game that recently is approaching cracking the top 50 games, which is weird for a solitaire game. My history includes a fun journey through AOL in its early days, EA Sports, The Sims, Carmen Sandiego, and Zynga.
Great.
And currently I'm doing mostly marketing in the sense of telling players how to do the things that all the features are in the game that they don't understand.
Next up is Joe.
Hey, Joe Kreiner. I'm business development for Epic Games. So Epic is more traditional, or coming out of the more traditional PC console game development side. But a few years ago, we made the change to a completely games as a service company. We don't necessarily call it free to play. Our general model is to design a game to be free to play, launch it under what we call Founders Pack access and collect money up front, and then slowly make the game less expensive until it goes completely free to play at some point. In general, that's our model. We also do mobile games as well, but haven't shipped one since Infinity Blade 3, which was more of a traditional style free-to-play game. We'll be shipping a few more mobile games in the near future, so we're getting back into that.
Rafael.
Hi, my name is Rafael Arizaga. I'm from Mexico. I started like 12 years ago with a small studio agency. We did a lot of advert gaming, a lot of games for agencies in Mexico, USA, and Panama, and a lot of places, more in the advertising side. But right now we are focusing on our own product. It's called Yepa. I'm the CEO. We are in early stage, but we are kind of finding ways to new monetization and business model for free-to-play businesses, reducing the risk. I'm sorry for the bad English. So that's what we are working on right now.
Yeah, I'll just say real quick. So Rafa's company basically has advertisers can get exposure instead of just selling ads into a game. They can basically give free samples of their products. People can install your SDK into their game, and then you can sort of go browse like an offer wall, pick a product you're interested in, play the game, and you can actually win the product as a prize.
Yeah, we're kind of trying to give reward the users with tangible goods, not just virtual goods. It's one of the business models we are working on.
And Brian.
Hello, Brian Urbanek, work at Activision on Call of Duty. I am on the development side of things. I do a lot of the actual design implementation of the free-to-play systems that are in the modern Call of Duty games, and I have a long history of other free-to-play mechanics and just traditional games in general.
All right, so that's overview. Our next question, or our first question, is kind of describing a little bit more about how you guys think about the relationship between the kinds of people who play your game, so your demographics, and the business model that you guys use in free-to-play, because I think we kind of got a really diverse group here. Brian, do you want to kind of talk a little bit about Call of Duty and how, you know, you've got sort of a hardcore shooter console audience, and you've started to introduce free-to-play there?
So monetization, free-to-play monetization, well, no. Call of Duty is not free-to-play. It is a premium game, and we charge a premium dollar for it. But we have a pseudo free-to-play system that everyone's getting somewhat familiar with these days, loot drops, which are things that you can earn automatically over the course of the game, or you can pay money to acquire them faster. Why we do it point blank is it earns an absurd amount of money, and they're here with us forever. And so, remember, I'm on the development side, and so the dictate that we're going to use these things comes down from these folks, and my job is to make them happen. And what we've worked really hard to do is to find the ways to frame them, think about them, and deliver them so that it becomes a positive experience for players, not a negative one. Simple example, you've already used to getting loot drops in every RPG you ever played. You kill the boss, loot drops. Call of Duty is like that. You play the game, you get access to free loot drops. What you're paying to do is to accelerate the pace that happens. You're substituting money for a little bit of time. And we internally kind of think of it as, it's like buying a DLC pack in installments, right? So we've always been doing this where players pay some money to get more content. We're just letting you do it a nickel at a time instead of 30 bucks at a time.
And I think, Joe, you and Brian kind of have a most similar type of business model. So Joe's got, you know,
Yeah, I mean,
MMO,
right,
PC games.
The kind of games that Epic has traditionally made are you know, right up the same kind of alley. In general, these days, though, we're trying to be a little bit more approachable to all players, not just hardcore, you know, Call of Duty audience, hardcore shooters. Our more recent game, Fortnite, has a very cartoony art style. It's made to appeal to a wide range of audiences. And, you know, we're still kind of making that transition from a traditional AAA company into games as a service, so we're kind of going along and learning lessons as we do. I mean, with Fortnite, the PvE version side of the game, we have a PvP called Battle Royale. It's a completely different economy. But the PvE side, we were doing loot drops, RNG style loot drops. And, you know, there's been some pushback from our players, so we're kind of adapting that system. We've learned that to be super community friendly and be overly generous when someone's willing to put some money into your ecosystem, and kind of treat it that way. Yeah, so that, I mean, that's pretty much all I can say about the loot drop stuff for us. And it's only in Fortnite. All the other games that we do, Paragon, for instance, is a MOBA. It's completely cosmetic and timer-based mechanics to inside the game to do free-to-play mechanics.
It's interesting to me the kind of loot drop economies that, you know, I'm used to. So at PurBlue, we do mobile games, and we're doing RPG and strategy stuff that is, you know, our RPG games are very hero-driven, so we have a lot of loot crates or mystery boxes, gotcha boxes, whatever you want to call them, and people, our primary sales driver is people spending hard currency on those to acquire heroes. And we don't get any pushback because I think it's much more established in the mobile space that kind of loot crates is what you get for the monetization model. So it's really interesting to kind of hear your guys' experience with kind of treading into those waters with people who are probably inherently a little more
Yeah.
skeptical and also very concerned about skill balance and fairness.
On the mobile side, you have a history of kind of that way to interact with your user base. On more of the PC console side, that's not been the case, and those two player bases don't necessarily intersect, so you are, in some cases, it's the first time somebody's seen these kind of systems and can have a negative reaction to them. The way Epic kind of designs our free-to-play mechanics is very different than most free-to-play companies. We design the game first and then figure out how to apply some sort of economy inside of that game development. Like, we don't set out to make a free-to-play friendly game necessarily. It's more build a game that we know is going to be fun, and then build an economy inside of that game that will generate some money for us, which is a very different way. I think a lot in the mobile side of the business, it's more about you come up with the concepts on how you're going to have an economy and then build a game to that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's pretty true. What about you, Rob? So Rob's no loot crates at all, casual games, saga style.
Yeah, we're almost exactly the same as these guys, except it's a saga style casual game. Tri-Peak Solitaire is just progression levels, different kind of solitaire layouts. Our audience is older, more female, and we're kind of, so in some ways we're very traditional saga game, all those mobile mechanics that you're familiar with. In other ways we are a little different because we've taken this solitaire game, which usually doesn't monetize with IAP, it's usually all ad driven. We've applied clubs and quests and leaderboards and all these supercell features to an audience that's largely female, older, North American, Midwestern, and found that they're just as competitive as all the people playing Clash of Clans, and it's been, we've been going up the charts that way with that. So that's kind of one of the main things for us. I'm not sure I think that traditional free-to-play space gets a little bit of a bad rap, and there are certainly, and coming from Zynga, there are certainly deserved bad raps like that. But I think most of the people in the free-to-play space are starting with what's a compelling game mechanic, what's a compelling experience, and we figure out how to monetize that with some traditional energy dynamics or things like that. But I think anybody who's not starting with what's a really fun core play experience is not going to last long.
So in your games, do you feel like you have, are your economies kind of fundamentally different than some of the other saga-style games? And when we say saga-style game, it's like a Candy Crush where you kind of just progress level, and just goes on forever.
Our game, when we introduced clubs, it made a huge difference because introducing clubs and leaderboards created a different dynamic. It's sort of a mid and elder game. So the whole orientation shifted from progression to and winning individual levels to winning leaderboards. And so it became less about I need the coins to play the next level to I need the tools to win levels. And it really shifted the economy, and we went from just coins that start levels to wild cards and volcano cards and booster cards and all sorts of things that help you win levels more efficiently, which people pay actual cash for.
So it sounds like you have a pretty kind of diverse consumable economy, like various like
it's
one-time, one-level buffs that you can apply.
Yep, everything is completely consumable. There's no like loot drop in the sense of like, oh, I got the new gun, I now have that gun forever. No, you get a thing and you use it, and you get more things later and you use them. And we actually going to the win mentality from the play mentality. We also changed all of our events around so that we used to do events of just sales, and we discovered after our 2-year holdback A/B test that sales did absolutely nothing for us, like zero incremental dollars. And we shifted all of our events around so that we started, instead of pushing coins, we started doing pull events to say, go burn your coins, trying to achieve something like a quest that then we'll give you a bunch of coins back. And it works sort of like a casino slot machine of a certain RTP, return to player. And we'll give you 95%. You spend a bunch of coins, you get a bunch of stuff back at the end if you win, you don't if you don't, and you spent the day playing and you feel great because you won something cool.
We should let Rafa jump in here a little bit with, so you have a very different business model, but what do your users look like, and how do you kind of?
Yeah, our users are millennials. We're 20 to 35 years. The main thing that we are approaching is that we found that the two main business models in free-to-play is using in-app purchases, but only 2%, sometimes less than 2%, is making all the revenue in that model. And if you don't have that 2% enough volume, you need to make ads, right? Or find another way to push more, or to make more money. And usually the people that is paying is the same people that make you more money. So it's tending to be a very similar to casino industry that is very ethical things around it. So we are trying to figure out how to boost or fix that two models. In the ad space, how to create real value, because usually the ads right now is coming for another games, mostly. So it's the same money turn around. So in the long term, it's not as sustainable. So it's very high risk, and there's a lot of issues around the for investors and people that want to jump in this industry. So we want to kind of fix that to think in more long-term way. So in the first side, in the in-app purchase, usually buy virtual goods. So we kind of research how the users will, how we can increase that to 2% of conversion. So we are trying to give real world value, so real tangible value, so the users can feel and touch, so that way they can feel more comfortable by buying things in digital. And in the advertising, in the ad model, instead of making intrusive ad that comes for makes stress things or stress the user, like he's playing and he wants to continue playing. We are trying to give them rewards from sponsor brands and make them to visit the places. So we are making actual visits to the brands. So it's not just brand awareness, but also actually conversion. So that's the how we can reduce the risk and increase the conversion and the revenue. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. Go ahead, Frank.
I had a question I'd like to pose to anyone. I'm always curious about this, but when it comes to like making a business or monetization style decision, a lot of times reaction to that from the player base can either be positive or negative. A lot of times the negative ones get a lot of press, like the new Star Wars game that came out. Players seem to hate the loot box system, calling to boycott the game, stuff like that. Oftentimes, the data doesn't back up that, oh, this sucks, like it makes a bajillion dollars, like you say. How do you reconcile player feedback to the actual results and data that you see? And is it possible in every situation? Like, I'm curious what that process looks like.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's all very different. I mean, for Epic, we spend a lot of time on community outreach. So we have a large community team. We find that you have to be proactive with with the community, the people that are playing your game, and all the different communication channels to try and guide the conversations to be positive in a lot of ways. You know, the internet's the internet, so if, a lot of times if you let a few very vocal players kind of just run with some negative comments, it can grow out of control. So in a lot of cases, our CEO, Tim Sweeney, will get involved in a Reddit and come in and be like, oh, hey, you know, you're complaining about this one thing. We actually didn't mean to do that. You know, we're going to change it in the next patch. So we're very proactive with our community to prevent that kind of thing from blowing up.
Anybody else want to feel that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, just the Star Wars Battlefront thing, if anyone didn't catch it, as of their beta, the only way to make character progression was by acquiring loot drops. They have indicated this may not be the case in the release game. The fan reaction was, let's use the word blister say that that caused a very active email thread within Activision of people who care about this sort of thing, saying, let's not do that. I can say that we spend a hell of a lot of time trying to think and frankly game out player reaction before we set out any sort of monetization solution. And the scope of the problem is, as we think about it, because YouTubers record themselves, YouTubers record themselves opening $100, $500 worth of loot boxes consecutively. And so that becomes shared on YouTube, and it's a permanent record. So anyone comes up with a thing, hey, this might not be fair, this might be rigged, this might be something, anything, there's a permanent record you can go back and look at of other players having these experiences and doing these things. So like that puts a level of pressure and a persistence of record, which sort of very much forces how I approach it. And the best solution we found so far, because Call of Duty, since it's a franchise with multiple titles, a new major title coming out every year, there's actually, and it's being done with different studios, which have different approaches to this thing, there's a lot of experimentation going on in real time as to how we approach things. Last year we had 2 Call of Duties come out, Infinite Warfare and Modern Warfare Remastered. These 2 titles took very, very different approaches in how they handle monetization. Infinite Warfare's had substantial player pushback. Modern Warfare Remastered had 0 player pushback, literally 0, because we had YouTubers who were opening these things leaping to our defense saying, no, reason, we saw these things. This was actually the best system we've seen yet. Embrace this. And we're okay with it. Hate that one over there. And so we actually just like hands off, step back, say nothing, do nothing, let them talk for us. So there's...
And some of the trick maybe to some of those systems, again, turning this whole panel into just loot crate design, is that sometimes actual randomness can be very punishing on players, and you have to think carefully in your designs about how you want to mitigate randomness so that it's bounded on either end. If you've got, like in our game, you're giving out a hero and there's a % chance of a drop. Well, a player rolls 100 crates and they get 1 hero, they're going to feel pretty crappy. So we do some things like that. Sometimes there's this concept that rigged is bad, but I think the right kind of rigged can actually be much better than pure randomness.
Rigged in players' favor. He said it. Be generous.
Yeah, be very generous.
He brought up they brought the like one thing I remember is they were complaining about it because the character progression without the loot crates took a punishing amount of time compared to with the loot crates, so they felt like they were being forced to. I was curious how you guys determine, the price of the loot crates versus time invested to get them in the gameplay itself.
Well, obviously a hard wall between the two is not the best system. I maybe let the panels talk a little bit more about the nuances there. You always need to have some free progression and some paid progression, right?
Lawyers and marketing people tell me at least this much, no more than that much. I do the math to make that be true.
Rob, do you have any perspective on sort of a very different audience, so older, more female, basically less kind of the young hardcore gamers who are more sort of, we think of as the people yelling on YouTube? Like, do you guys get pushback as well?
We don't have loot crates.
But what about on consumable pricing or?
I think the main thing is, I learned a great word in our Tri-Peak studio from our GM. He used the word healthy a lot. And it's for everything. And the first way to handle people complaining about your game is don't give them something to complain about, and be real conscious of what are you asking for money for, and really are you providing the benefit for that, or are you extorting it? Our game has been on a growth path for 3 years now. When we found in the more traditional free-to-play space, the way you make a lot more money is you make your fundamentals sound, and then you spend a ton of money on user acquisition and bring more people in. or you find better value, more valuable features, or in some of our cases, we just have features that players don't understand how to use, and if you explain it to them, which is kind of my particular niche in the world, is coming from a lifetime of development and now being a marketing guy, is just, hey, did you know that these things were available here and you can spend some coins on them and they'll make you win a level? Oh, I didn't? Oh, good, here you go. And people are happy to go spend that money and we don't get a ton of pushback. So, having a healthy development team culture, having a healthy player culture, having healthy growth but not crazy expectations of growth of revenue is like the best way to get there. I will add also that all the major things that players complain about are a result of the fact that we have randomness in our game, and I played 8 levels and I didn't get a single volcano card. This thing is rigged. No, really it isn't. It's the laws of probability.
Randomness is bad.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When you design gameplay and monetization, what kind of processes do you have in place to kind of be sure you're not veering over into gaming, gambling, which is illegal, and so that you're staying on the sunny side?
I think the easiest thing is you never pay them money back. As long as you're, like in our casino games, if all you're ever doing is winning tokens or coins or something, and then you spend them, and when you win, all you get are tokens that you can continue to spend, eventually you'll run out and you buy more. If you don't have an opportunity to win actual money back, then it's not gambling.
Yeah, that's probably the simplest answer. I think there's some country by country regulations around things like loot crates that start to get fairly complex. If you want to grab Brian afterwards and he's allowed to talk about some of that stuff, you talk your ear off. The next question I had kind of for the panel was thinking about, so we've got a mixture of people who are more on the business side and more on the design side. So what kind of metrics, everybody knows we look at monetization and retention. Those are so broad that they're not even really metrics. I was going to ask the panel to dive a little bit deeper and talk about what are the specific things that kind of drive their designs in their particular types of games.
I think more than the kind of game, it's also the stage of the game and the cycle that you are in.
Right.
Usually, it's like a domino, right? You first focus on the acquisition, then to the onboarding, and then the 1-day retention, 3-day retention, then the revenue, and then make it to other people share it to make more acquisition. So I will focus on what stage are you in, and thinking long term is the short term. We said in the talk the other day is not burn the furniture, right? Not put all the things in I don't know how to explain it, but don't burn all the things that you have in the short term, so you can continue to making revenue or retention in the long term.
Not the number one metric by which you can tell a person who's monetizing the game or not is how long they played the game for.
Yeah.
Be generous. Keep them in the game. More retention equals more money. Period.
Yeah, I mean, that's really all Epic cares about is retention. It's one of those things where if we make money, great, but as long as you have the audience, you can figure out ways to make money over time. With Fortnite Battle Royale, we put it out for free. We didn't have any way to make money when we launched that. We had 10 million players or whatever in there playing a game that there was no way to give us money. We didn't care because we're building an audience and we'll figure out how to monetize them later, right?
Yeah. It's a little different, I'd say, for us as a small studio that maybe puts out 1 game a year or 2 games a year. We actually do need to make sure we make money very quickly.
Yeah.
Epic, you guys have some other.
Money's good.
I mean,
What's
well,
that?
we put like $60 million into Fortnite before we shipped it.
Yeah.
So,
Our development costs are maybe,
A little less.
yeah, less than an order of magnitude of that. But still, I agree that, so I think that's where some of the sort of using proven economies is something that you do a lot as a studio that can't afford to take as many risks because you have one flop and you're out of business kind of thing. So, our kind of hero-based RPGs have a lot of, well-known progression and also kind of these loot drop mechanics. But for us, we have kind of high LTV games, but they're also high acquisition costs. So we look a lot at the late game LTV component. And for us, there's also maybe a little bit more of a separation between, we have a lot of players that will stick around a long time and never pay. It's much more of the payers will keep paying over a long period of time, but the non-payers may really never pay. And when we do try to run sales and events to them, it's low success. So we kind of focus in on adding additional kind of investment systems late in the game where people don't kind of get capped out on their heroes. And it's kind of for us, it's a mix of, you can't just add investment systems, you have to add things to do with that additional power that you're gaining. So it's kind of add new gameplay, new ways to play the game, and new arena style, new co-op PvE, there's all these kind of different ways to kind of remix the combat. And then if you pair that with, hey, there's also a way to make your heroes more powerful by adding some gear on them that's upgradable in addition to just the base hero, then I think players can have a lot of fun with that, and they feel like, oh, I really want that gear because it's going to be a lot of fun to be more powerful in this different new mode. But I think if you just sort of slap them with more and more and more gameplay with the exact same set of stuff, it starts to get boring. Or if you just try to get them to pay more money for something that, they're playing the same combat over and over again, it can also get boring.
We found the key to retention in the kind of games we make is just have a very consistent pace of new gameplay and new content coming into the game. With Paragon, we did a new character every 3 weeks. With Fortnite, we're releasing these giant packs of content that bring about completely new systems into the game, on a roughly quarterly basis. And we have a roadmap to do that for, very long time after launch. If you look at Paragon, and today it's got the same number of people working on it as it did when it initially shipped a year ago. So if you're building a free-to-play game, you kind of have to have that plan. The shipping is just a small stop in the arc of development. You really need to have a plan to continue post that. The second you stop actively adding things into the game, you'll see your retention fall off a cliff usually.
I'd say one of the main things, we too like money. It's good, it pays our bills. We don't have the ability to go for years and years without stuff. There's all the fundamentals that we look at on the DAU installs, retention, various levels of retention side. There's the monetization standard ones of revenue per user, revenue per paying user, payer percentage, all that stuff, and you just track all of that because that will also tell you things about your players. If your revenues are increasing and your payer percentage is not increasing, you're extracting more money from the same people, and that starts to get you into a world where it's not as healthy as you might like. You might want more payer percentage. Your installs are going up and your payer percentage is not going up. You're buying a bunch of people who aren't paying. So, what's the value of those users? Other than that we have them and maybe someday we can get them to pay. But my main mantra is just what are you trying to do? And I guess the other main mantra is that KPI, you don't move KPIs. You hear that a lot. How do we move the KPIs? You don't move KPIs. You move player behaviors. What are you trying to do? And the answer, you might start with, well, I want our payer percentage to go up, but you don't get to end there. You get to say, what is the thing that I'm going to offer that makes people more likely to pay? I'm going to create a starter pack. Okay, great, but will they pay after that, or is that just a one-time discount deal? What is the thing? We're not offering things of value then. Okay, how do we offer things of value to those players who are not buying the things of value currently? Are we too focused on our clubs? Should we be focused more on leaderboards? Is there an audience that wants to do that instead? And if you have that mentality of what are my risks for my game? What are the values that I can offer? What are the behaviors that we would want to change? And then what KPIs would we measure? We kind of measure everything. We introduced a sale of a new type of product, and when we launched it, our purchase curve was spikes every 3 days. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, we have a 3-day cooldown because we don't want to spam our players. And they thought it was normal. And I said, do you not recognize that second spike is people who wish they could buy day 2, right? it's not that we're trying to milk our players out of stuff, it's that we're literally not letting them buy the thing they want. So, you know, we can use that data to go change the way we set up the game. You know, it's kind of a revelation when you start working that way.
I was going to ask Brian or Rafa about pacing content, because we talked about that offline a little bit, and how you guys think about that in your business design.
In our case, the content treadmill that we have in the platform is everything. We found that that variability of content make the users to be engaged in the long term. So we are finding the ways to increase the variability. Also, each hour we generate with the variables that we have, that is businesses, rewards, games, to increase the variability and make the users to be engaged and curious about what's coming on the next hour.
So you'll intentionally hold back some content so that people don't burn through it too fast? Is that?
Exactly. So instead of giving a lot of content put all the content available every time, we mix it every hour. We treadmill the content, the same content. Yeah.
Short tongue-in-cheek answer: multivariate calculus. More
I was
complicated.
just going to say that.
So the content that we create for Call of Duty takes a lot of lead time for the quality of art content that we're putting out every new gun, every piece of uniform. So we are hard gated on how much, how fast. And that feeds into figuring out how much we want to charge for, how much we want to give out, to the player, to try to find that sweet spot where we're giving them enough stuff at a price point where they are engaged, purchasing, but not super whale, is almost but not quite completing the set when we push out the new set. And just pushing around the factors and the numbers and running models and simulations until we find the generosity level and price point level where we keep players. Ultimately, we want players to almost but not quite complete the set before we release out a new set, if they are an engaged payer. We want it to feel like, for the casual player, it is achievable if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
You never want a player to feel like they couldn't achieve it. Yeah, it's like, I keep feeling like something you mentioned a long time ago about where does the design of the game versus design of the MTX, like how does that kind of pace out? And I really feel like the answer needs to be not, we have an MTX model first and then make a game to fit it, and not, we try to fit MTX into a game after the fact. You need to, during game design, consciously block out, this is what MTX on, and let's make sure it has a place, let's make sure it fits in organically and it feels good to get it, and the game is still fun without it.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of, that gives you that streamline to get to that point.
How are we doing on time? I was going to check real quick. We have
Yeah, about
20
20 minutes.
minutes? Okay. I was debating whether to go to questions or maybe our last question I'll kind of ask. Some specific examples from you guys about a feature you implemented recently that kind of met your business goals, and tell us a little bit about, I think how you measure success is an interesting question. So if you have any kind of anecdotes on, you know, how you thought about how do you measure success before you put the feature out, and how you look at it after the feature out, and really kind of connect those things back.
You want to go ahead?
Yeah, in our case, we kind of have this situation that we measure the retention all the time. It's our main focus. But sometimes the long-term retention doesn't come along in the short period of time. So because we are developing in 1 week sprints,
Right.
we can't know about the 90-day retention on the next week sprint. Mm-hmm. So what we are doing to trying to figure it out, because sometimes, for example, we make this level system in our platform in which we wanted to put the users more value for the long term, but in the short term doesn't fit the metrics. But we saw that in the long term we start having more users to come back in the long term. So that's a interesting thing.
Is that just a matter of patience and not judging something too early after it releases?
Yeah, it has to be to the feature, what's the goal, and
Right.
how long you will wait for that particular feature to have the success that you want.
What about early indicators for things? I think that's a common problem in free-to-play games as service, is you build stuff and a lot of things you can't tell if they're a success right away and they need a long time to bake. Is there a way to get predictors or early indicators for you guys?
For us, I mean, you always have to be testing your ideas, always, like, get your game in the hands of players as early as possible in some limited fashion or limited region that you can control, and that way you're not, spoiling your player base, but find a group of users that you can get your game into their hands and then track the data, give them different options to monetize and see what works, and that'll at least tell you that you're headed in the right direction, and then refine that over time is how we do it.
Do you guys use, like beta groups or different servers or split tests or
Yeah,
all of those?
like for instance, for Fortnite, it has had it's been in closed alpha for 4 years. And we would, as groups of people would fall out, we would just invite more players that were interested. We had an email sign up on our website. We would just invite new cohorts in, and see how they react to how the game is in that snapshot, and then just refine it over time. With our mobile games, we region release, so we have a game we're working on called Battle Breakers, and it's available in the Philippines right now, and we're using that to kind of test out our monetization ideas and see if we still know how to make mobile games or not. And doing that, yeah, right. We think we know what we're doing, but for me, we just turned Fortnite Battle Royale monetization on yesterday. It's today, Friday, yeah, yesterday. And we added just some, maybe a half a dozen cosmetic changes to your character that you can buy. And we picked those prices, our two data scientists kind of picked them based on some witch doctor science and the feel of our community team. And yesterday was our first experiment to see how that worked. From the data I saw this morning, we quadrupled our daily earnout, so feels look pretty good, but now we have to refine that and see where the players expect those prices to be and what will achieve the maximum benefit from them.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when you release a new thing that's purchasable, people will rush and buy it initially, and you can get some very early spikes. So
Yeah.
I think an important thing in measuring.
The early data is not always that
Yeah.
useful, right?
If there's pent up demand for something, then you got to wait for that demand to die down and see what the steady state is going to be.
I have sort of a self-serving question because I'm a community manager. How do you factor in the feedback from your community team? It sounds like Epic does a lot. I don't know how much Raven does. Before you release a feature.
Well, at Epic we do that a lot. So we kind of use the community team as a sounding board on, is this monetization idea crazy? Are we going to get negative feedback from the players? And we kind of use them as an early indicator if we have a problem. Sometimes we listen to them, sometimes we don't. And if we don't listen to them, then we kind of verify by releasing it to a smaller audience generally, if we can. In the case of Battle Royale, now it's out there. So if we make a change, it's for everybody. And you have to be very careful about that, because if you ruin your player base by getting too greedy or releasing something that's just they view as super negative, it's really hard to come back from that. So we're overly cautious about making any sort of change that we feel that the player base is going to have a negative reaction to. It's so much of a discussion at Epic that the community team and our executive team in a lot of cases are sitting there talking to one another about what we're going to do.
Brian or Rob, do you guys have any thoughts on kind of trying to measure success before and after something comes out?
Well, In our case, I mean, most of these examples we're talking about are like launches of new products.
Right.
Which is much harder. A lot of our stuff is new features. Same things. What are you trying to do? And then therefore, what are you trying to measure? And then that's how you figure out if it's a success. And it's a good discipline to forecast. Anyways, even if you know nothing, go find some data somewhere that gives you an idea, so you get better at understanding how good you are at forecasting, and deciding what to do, and then release it to a cohort. Make sure it's okay. It's always great to get those first positive. It beats the hell out of, we just lost 50% of our revenue releasing it, so it's nice when it goes up.
Yeah.
But it is a constant battle to get people to not jump too early.
How do you guys release to just a cohort? Do you
We just
A/B test.
Yeah.
do you have any issues with players finding out about A/B tests?
Absolutely, it's probably one of the big community issues. And we're trying to be very upfront that, hey, we're trying to make this stuff go. We want to make sure it works. We want to make sure it doesn't unbalance the game, have a bunch of exploits. But yeah, and it's, we learned as we started creating clubs and having people talk to each other more that these long-running 2-year A/B tests with holdbacks of sales and whatnot were just no longer viable, and we have to move more flexibly.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned somewhere in Zynga, I guess, a while ago, it's like, listen to what your players say, but act on what they do, right? And that's sort of the distinction between, do I have a small and vocal group that I have to deal with, or is this really a thing? They're canaries in the coal mine sometimes, but sometimes they're just, I don't know,
Two cans of
Ang-
forest.
angry canaries,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Always angry canaries. No matter what you do, there are some people that
They're
are
there.
just going to be angry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like one theme that's kind of emerging, I'm just gonna make one comment, is that transparency is super important when you're dealing with monetization, and that's maybe something that is becoming more prevalent, and it's good to hear that everybody on the panel kind of feels the same way, is that, I think players understand at some level that you need to make money, you're running a business, and that it's a game that's a service, it's not gonna be static forever, and they wanna see the game grow and evolve too. And so the more you can kind of explain to them why you're doing stuff and not just what you're doing. I think it just starts, some games aren't even good at explaining what they're doing. They'll put a release out and players have to figure out what changed. They changed the drop rate on something, surprise. We really try to tell people anytime any of the stats change that are not inherently visible in the game. So if we actually play around with our hero balance a lot. We'll nerf heroes, we'll power up other ones, we try not to do a lot of nerfing, but sometimes it is kind of necessary for the sake of overall game balance. So we know that we're going to get a certain amount of negative feedback on that stuff, but we just tell people, get out in front of it, and then actually try to have a conversation around it with them, either in the patch notes more in kind of a one-way dialogue, or sometimes we'll fire up, forums, we'll do videos where we sit down, chats, live chats with players, and we'll whether it's just letting players vent, or, we do sometimes, we just recently changed something because we were going to nerf a beloved hero, and we decided we kind of went a little too far, and we weren't kind of approaching something the right way, and we just pulled it back. So I think as long as players see that there's a dialogue and that there's kind of a give and take relationship, and that they can actually have an impact on the game, it goes a long way to, the one time that you do really screw something up, you've built up some political capital there, and you've got some forgiveness, and you can sort of pay that out, and then hopefully you don't do it again really soon after that. Yeah. What was your question?
In the retail market, U.S. worldwide, there's a market for ultra luxury goods. You can buy a Rolex watch, you can buy a Timex watch, they both do the same thing. I'm wondering what you found in your games, where the upper limit is in what you can charge for anything, and if there is an ultra luxury market there that maybe you haven't tapped, or maybe you have.
So, got some interesting anecdotes. So at Epic, we aren't trying to find that upper limit because we don't want to push that upper limit because it will expend political capital with your user base. However, that being said, with Fortnite, the most expensive Founders Pack, I think, was $149.99. It might have been $100. I don't remember where it settled out, but the majority of the revenue that we got from the Founders Pack sales was from the highest end tier. Not something we expected at all. People spending that kind of money to get into the game. Now we had the benefit of tons of a long tail of marketing and awareness, people wanting to get into the game. But it did seem like people were willing to spend more than we even anticipated to play our game.
In America, it doesn't go too far. In China or in South Korea, your head would explode. Example, 10 years old. Lineage. The game sold the ability to buy a ring that you could give to someone else. And there's a tier of rings, from the simple ring up through the Elite Diamond ring. And the Elite Diamond ring was only buyable through real money. I think it was something like $400 conversion at the time, like 10 years ago. What this does in game is nothing. It makes, at the top end, there'd be a little sparkle on the finger of the character who was wearing it. That's it. That's it. None of the rings sold except for the $400 one, which sold like crazy, because people kept giving it to their in-game girlfriends. Because no one would give them the cheaper ring, because don't you love me? Give me the good one, what the hell? And then it's gone up from there. I can think of at least one product which has sold a virtual good for $10,000 in China.
Yeah, like PUBG right now, one of the outfits that you can buy, it was a limited edition. They're selling for $400 on Steamworks, that kind of thing.
I've got rare hats in
Team Fortress?
Team Fortress, yeah.
The hat game?
Yeah. So if you build the economy that supports unique items, you'll see all sorts of crazy stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily generate a ton of revenue, but it does encourage your whales to hang around, I think is usually what I
Yeah.
see from that, right?
Yeah.
The most useful model I've ever seen to sort of explain consumer behavior around this stuff, that people are familiar with Emily Greer. She's the CEO of Congregate. She has a great presentation about how free-to-play games are essentially a hobby. Okay, you think of them as actually kind of going to the store and buying stuff, and why would somebody buy, an intangible item for $1,000? I don't think that's the right model. The hobbyist model is more like, think about somebody who plays golf. Emily actually writes about figure skating, which is what she does. Like, my dad plays golf. He spends so much freaking money on golf, right? You buy tees, you buy balls, you buy shoes, you buy clothes. You might pay to go to see the U.S. Open. I mean, how much does it cost to get a ticket for that? Then you got greens fees. You buy food when you're at the thing. And I think you kind of, think about like the durable economy of buying goods versus consumables. Same thing. Like a consumable at golf is, getting a beer at the clubhouse, and the durable goods are buying a new set of clubs. And people buy new sets of clubs every year, every 2 years, and they spend thousands of dollars a year. But there's also people who only play at public courses. They use secondhand clubs and stuff like that, or they play once a year. So there's any hobby I think has a really broad range of kind of investment. And there are people at the top of the hobby who love, like, I'm a golfer, that's who I am, and I want to tell the world that I'm a golfer, and that either I'm really good, so I have all the pro gear, or maybe I'm not really good, but I just like the golfing lifestyle, and I'm a member of that club. So I think a lot of those behavioral psychology components all are at work in free-to-play games.
I want to double down on that. Greer, Greer. If you're in this room, you should be watching her videos.
Yeah, Congregate has a really good blog. If you just Google Congregate blog, Congregate with a K. I think we're officially open for questions. People have other stuff in the back.
So I had a question back on the topic of randomness. Have you guys been able to quantify in your experience how compelling an in-game purchase is if it's purchasing a chance at something versus a very explicit item that they're buying, and what's more compelling to your users?
Probably.
Okay.
Well, maybe another way to ask that question is, why don't people just sell items? Why do they use chance at all? And probably.
Yeah, clearly the answer must be it makes more money, right?
And I mean, if you look at the top, I'm in mobile, so I look at the top grossing games a lot, and so many of the top grossing games are slot machine games. I think there is an element where it's super fun to open something that you don't know what it is and get something out and have that chance of it being a jackpot versus not. And I think that overall, again, behavioral psychology, consumer psychology has really been the thing that sticks in free-to-play games so far.
And maybe it's just, balancing
we actually have, we've started selling chests in the game recently, and so the jury's still out, but we had avid discussions about like actually paying cash directly for an item and what do you have, and of course the place we ended up with was, you can't be disappointed exactly, right? So, I think where we came out was more, it's just, you just have to have a little bit more disconnect between the actual payment and something like you buy coins in a casino game and you're putting the coins in and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and it's very diffuse. But I think a lot of us are scared of, and we'll find out that data soon.
Well, there's also legal ramifications. Like in Asia or China, do not do that. Do not do direct money equals item. That is bad. They'll crush you with the law.
The one last thing, I'll get to Tara in a second, I'll say about it is like, you always need to have a model in your head. So how much is your hard currency worth and how much is the thing you're selling worth? So if you, and again, it's pretty hard, you have to kind of work those things out over time in your specific game economy. But when we design a gotcha chest or a loot crate, we know that we want to give out X amount of value of virtual goods for Y amount of hard currency. So we will actually design different ones. Some are kind of like very chancy, and there might be a small chance of, something that's worth hundreds of dollars, or you have something where the band of randomness is narrow, and you just got to try those in your game and see what your audience likes. And you may find that a certain audience likes this and a certain audience likes that. And generally, the more you kind of mix up the kinds of things you're selling and the kinds of people you're targeting, the better you're going to do in your games.
Where we've seen disappointment in the user base over the random RNG stuff is if they're trying to get something very specific that they can only get through your loot drops, and they just it happens to be a rare item, and they feel like they're just going back to the well to the point where it's ridiculous. That's where you get player disappointment. So you either solve that by having it available some other way where they can spend in-game currency, or you can modify your randomness to make sure that they get it eventually.
This is dovetail with the third option. We did this in the most recent Call of Duty. Hearthstone does this. You give a little bit of currency, like in-game special magic crafting currency with your loot box, and if you get a duplicate item, you turn it into the crafting currency, and then you spend the crafting currency at a specific item. That's how.
Yeah.
That's how we put a hard spend cap in Call of Duty loot crates. Like, you will never need to spend more than X dollars to get everything, because after X dollars, you'll have always either gotten it by roll or built up enough currency to just straight up buy it.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a whole art form to making sure that the sort of the booby prizes, the junky stuff you get out of loot crates, are usable down the line, that you can sort of recycle one thing into another thing, and you don't feel like you're just spending money.
You have to have a system to do that these days.
I think that what I was going to say sort of dovetails with that is that the other factor with random is prestige. We had a hero that was only available in our chest, and it has the same drop chance as any other hero before, but people really like the hero. And as soon as you unlock a hero, you can change your profile picture to that hero. As soon as someone shows up in chat with that guy, some people say, I've opened so many gold chests to try and get that guy because I really, really wanted him. So on the one hand, you can look at it as an ethics thing, like are we pushing people's gambling buttons? But on the other hand, if it's only available at random chance, people really like to be the first person or the first 10th person to have gotten that thing out of that chest and be able to show it off to people. That's a really big player satisfaction thing for us.
Exclusivity has social value.
Yeah, that's where live service comes in. It's the adjustment of that. So starting out with it being completely random, but then adding it to a store later.
Totally.
Yeah, that's a good point. So a lot of, I think, well-designed free-to-play monetization systems sort of, what's the word? They start very exclusive, like the, VIP thing that if you go to Saks Fifth Avenue and try to buy a nice coat, it might be, pre-sale for somebody, or back to the golf clubs, and then they get marked down, and then they're in the sale rack. And if you kind of do that too, that's another way to let free-to-play gamers know, or the less big spenders know, I can't have this now. But in a game of service, a lot of times it is about getting something first and sort of competing and getting in front of other people. So you kind of let people choose how how fast they want that desirable thing.
Stepped access.
Stepped access, yeah. So I'm sure what the jargony word for that is.
I was just curious, you guys, through the revenues, we found that, like, the loot boxes where it's actually in-game items that will boost your character up, or if it's purely cosmetic items tend to sell better.
I think a lot of that has to do with the game type and the audience. 5 minutes, okay.
Very good. Yeah.
We're done.
Not 5 minutes?
It's 12:30, whatever.
Okay. Anybody want to answer that last question on cosmetic versus, we don't really sell cosmetic stuff, I'll say, in mobile. We don't find it sells very well, but I think in the games that are more skill-based.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's, with the MOBA that we make, Paragon, most of the things we sell are cosmetic. Fortnite, anytime you have a player competing against another player, we tend to just do cosmetic things versus pay to win. We never want to have a pay to win system, right? That's players really react negatively to that.
Big swear word in the community.
Yeah.
Rob, do you guys sell cosmetic stuff in your more casual games? No.
Not really. I mean, for Pogo, we had badges, but they were definitely things that you earned.
Yeah. Yeah, I think visible achievements, like Tara was saying, that are hard to get either from chance or because you have to work really hard to get them, are things that can be sort of cosmetic, but they ultimately have a competitive route to them. And the pure cosmetic stuff works best in the PvP skill-oriented things.
The Call of Duty answer to the question is different emphasis generates different profiles for who's paying.
That's true too.
Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, the best, most potent guns in the game were only through loot drops, and that created a very predictable profile of people who were paying in a very predictable profile of what the pay, of what people were paying, how many people were paying, and how they paid over time. Modern Warfare did a very different profile where the guns in those loot boxes were a different experience, like the only auto-fire shotgun, but it was a balance because all the shots were much lower damage per shot. So it felt different to use, it was competitively equivalent. And that had a very different profile of people who engaged and how much they engaged for. And at that point, you're just doing math, figure out which one's better for your bottom line.
All right, we should probably wrap up. If people want to come up and ask questions afterwards, we can do that. But thank you. Thanks to everybody on the panel for